So our next guest is Dave Beldyk from Third Stage Consulting. Dave is a senior manager, managing consultant at the company. He manages and leads a number of different engagements with us, and Dave's actually someone that I've known for several years in the industry, even prior to starting Third Stage. So excited to have him on our team and excited to have him on the show today. And we're going to talk today with Dave about this whole concept of getting more value out of your transformation. And like I mentioned before the break, it's something that a lot of organizations don't think about when they embark on these projects. But given that you're about to spend a lot of time and money and resources and potentially heartburn on this sort of project, it's important to make sure you're getting the most value out of it that you possibly can. So, Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you and I share a common interest in benefits realization and benefits optimization. And you know, I've known each other now for a few years and run in the same industry circles. And it's almost like a kindred spirit or, you know, kind of a long lost brother or something when I hear you talk about some of this stuff, because, you know, there's times when you talk about the way transformation should be versus the way they actually are in reality most times. Sometimes you feel like you're crazy when you start talking about this stuff, and then and I kind of come across someone like you who shares a lot of the same values and sort of approach and philosophy to these sorts of transformations. And so, what I wanted to do today is just ask you a bunch of questions around benefits optimization in general. You know, how to get more out of your implementation, and really how to implement right. You know, and a lot of what we'll talk about, I think, runs counter to what software vendors and system integrators might tell you,
Yeah.
but this is, you know, what you and I both found to be pretty effective, both in terms of doing it right from the start, but certainly if you're in the middle of a project and you're already starting to see some warning signs, or you're concerned that things might be getting off track, we'll talk about some things you can do to remediate that as well throughout the discussion here today. So I guess to start, you know, if we just back up and before we start talking about how to optimize benefits and maybe get even more fundamental, you know, forget about optimizing benefits for a moment. And let's just talk about how to not fail. You know, how do we go through these
Yeah.
implementations in a way that isn't going to fail? You know, a lot of the research that you've pointed to, that I've pointed to from Gartner and other industry analysts, even our own research at Third Stage supports this, shows that most projects fail 50% or more. Some stats I've seen are as high as 80% of transformations fail. Why is that? Just at a high level, what are some of the reasons why those projects fail?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things, of course, but one of them I know is near and dear to you, and one of the big ones is organizational change management. I think another big one is getting the master data right. We all know ERP is a beast when it comes to data. You've got to have that right. And if you think about these two things, unlike a lot of the other technical stuff that happens during a project, these are things that actually the implementing organization largely needs to own. I mean, a system integrator is going to help you a little bit with giving you guidance through some of the OCM stuff and like doing business impact assessments and stakeholder analysis and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's you, the implementing organization, that needs to get your organization to change. And
Right.
with the master data stuff, again, they're going to help you with some of that technical stuff, but they can't tell you what your materials are. They can't tell you, your bill of materials. They might help you decide, do I need a single level or a multi-level? Okay, that's cool. But they can't tell you what the ratio of ingredients are. That you've got to do that. So you find that the implementing organization has got two heavy lifts that they have to do. And I mean, typically they're not experts at that. So that's to me, that's a lot of the reasons why failures happen.
Right. Yeah, those are two big ones that we often see, change management data. Um, what about, you know, if we sort of dig in a little bit more into sort of the nuts and bolts and the moving parts that contribute to either success or failure, one of those that I know you and I've talked about in the past is business process improvement, business process
Mhm.
mapping, value stream mapping, whatever you want to call it. Um, when should that process start? Because that is, you know, kind of a root cause for a lot of projects that struggle, is they don't address business process and workflows well or effectively or at the right time. So when should that business process work start?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer that business process work should start very early in the game. I think, there's a lot of things you got to do in an ERP implementation that you really can't get into too much until you actually have a system defined and all that stuff, and a lot of that detailed stuff. But there's a whole bunch of supporting processes, what I like to call the foundational support processes that you've got to put in place first. And I mean, for example, if you're going to be moving to an ERP system and you're on legacy, ERP is a, you know, it's a real-time system. So if you're not doing real-time activities today, if you're not, you know, if you're in the habit of doing something where your folks on the shop floor might record stuff on paper or even in another system, and then they upload it, you know, a day later or a weekend, you know, if they work on the weekend and load it up on Monday, that's something you've got to overcome. You've got to try to get to where you're doing that real time, and that doesn't just happen. You know, that you've got to work through that. And I'm a big believer that the more of those things like that you can get done before you start your implementation, the better it'll be. So I'm a big believer to start that stuff early.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard you talk about the analogy of, if you need a taxi and you call the taxi while you're still getting ready, or the taxi shows up and you're not ready yet and you're still packing your bags or getting the kids ready or whatever,
Oh yeah.
it's running, right?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that, you know, what I've seen is a lot of folks, a lot of organizations, they want to get started quickly. They want to go, give me a system integrator, then I'll get started. And what you find out is that there's a lot of things that you've got to figure out for yourself, like, you know, what are my, who owns what materials, who owns what data elements, who do I go to for certain decisions, how do I, you know, how do I even categorize these things to prioritize my work activities and stuff like that. And what you see happen is, when you, if you wait until you get the system integrator to start any of that stuff, then when the system integrator finally comes in and you say, okay, now you know, I've got these, I'm looking at data and I see a customer and you've got 4 different addresses here. What's the right one? And then you're scrambling then to go figure that stuff out. And, or, you know, just any number of 1,000 examples I could give there. What you find out is, you know, the system integrator, you know, they're very patient. They'll wait. I'll wait. You know, it's just take
Right.
your time. It's all billable. It's all good for me. So you find yourself scrambling, doing things that you know you should have done, you know, months ago. You knew this project was coming. You know you've got some things to clean up, and you didn't take the time to do it. It's funny. I talk to people after you know, they're a year into an implementation, and inevitably they all say, God, I wish I started this stuff early. If I had just, you know, because you got so much stuff to do, and then you realize, why am I having to figure out some of these things now when I should have figured that out before? So I'm like, anything you can and should do before you can bring in the system integrator, I think you should go after, because I think those are things that if you can get some of those things knocked out before you bring in the system integrator, then you'll be much more efficient in their use, because they're not inexpensive resources. The meter does run pretty fast, so if you can knock those things out, you'll get much more efficient use and be more effective there.
Right. Yeah. I'm still waiting to meet that client that says, the one mistake we made is we wish we wouldn't have started, you know, work stream X as early as we did. We started it too soon. I've yet to meet that client for anything. I mean, whether it's process improvement or data or change management. I would love to meet that client someday, because I'd rather err on that side, of,
Exactly. It'd be nice to
challenge.
see that. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I haven't met that client either.
Yeah. Someday, we'll keep striving to that level of achievement there. Um, so when we look at the technology itself, though, when we look at cloud technology and other advancements,
Mm.
configuring and setting up a ERP system now is a lot easier than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago, as far as just the complexity and relative ease of setting up the technology. Why does this, well, I won't answer the question for you. Let me ask, does this mean that implementations are getting easier, faster, cheaper overall, given that the technology has advanced this much?
But you know, it's interesting, because if you talk to the system integrator, you know, the answer you might hear is, of course, this is easy now. It's so much easier to set up. And but as you know, that the actual standing up of the system is such a small part of the overall success factors for getting the implementation right, that
Mm.
it really, in fact, it almost works against you, because what happens is, because you can stand it up so much faster, there's this belief that we can make this thing happen faster. And what happens is, that all that organizational change that has to take place, all that data cleansing that has to take place, now that time frame gets shrunk. And so now you've got much more pressure to get this done. And again, the system integrator sitting there, I'm take your time, I'm good, I'm patient. They're tapping, the meter's running, and you really get a huge amount of pressure from both internal and external when that happens. So you see the expectation set at leadership. If you're an implementing organization, the CEO hears how easy it is to set stuff up, and they're thinking, oh man, this used to be a 2-year project. Now I can do it in a year or 16 months. And that mindset just starts the whole ball rolling. And it's tough. I find it actually, I think the notion that you can stand it up faster. But there's actually one other thing I should have said, because of the cloud structure. A lot of the bells and whistles that used to be available, it's a little bit more vanilla, I would say. That's how I would put it, a little bit more vanilla. So you have less choices. So with
Right.
less choices, that tends to mean you're likely to have to adapt more. So you got
Right.
more adaptation in shorter time frame. It gets tough. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. And if you think about technological advancements in general, in addition to being a little bit more straightforward and a little bit more vanilla in terms of how you set it up, given all the advancements in technology, you think about things like artificial intelligence or
Mhm.
blockchain or predictive analytics, whatever it may be. There's a lot of advancements that have happened in technology, in addition to the cloud. And what I would argue is that those advancements and the technological changes have actually increased the risk and increased the amount of time and effort it takes to implement, not because the technology hasn't gotten better, but because now you're imposing more change on your organization, whether it's because of these vanilla workflows that now you're being forced to adapt to, or because the technological advancements as a whole, for the enterprise software has changed so much that it's going to be a bigger change, a bigger leap for your organization to adapt to it.
I totally agree. Yes.
But software vendors and system integrators don't want you to hear that. They don't want to tell you that, because they don't want to spook you, because you're about to sign this big, multi-million dollar contract potentially for software and services to go on top of that. So I think it's, important to back up. And even if it's the right answer for you, that solution and that system integrator you might be talking to, you really want to take that with a grain of salt. Has been, my finding. Just kind of make it right sized for your organization.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of almost like to change the dialogue out there in the industry, because there seems to be this, once an organization is committed to a project, they kind of focus on that go live. I want to get to that go live faster. And I really want to change the dialogue, so they're more thinking about, how do I get to world class ERP operation faster? And it's not the same thing, because you can rush into a go live and have a train wreck and never get to world class, or you can take the time, build the proper foundation, and go live a little bit later, but ultimately get to world class faster. And that's kind of where I get excited, is it's not about rushing to go live. It's about, how do I make sure I'm successful, number one, and how do I get to world class the fastest way? And I think
Yeah.
it's by putting those foundational pieces in place first. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Um, well, actually, continuing that thread, actually, that's a good segue into the next question I had for you. Um, I've heard you talk in some of your presentations that you've given about this topic, about how a lot of organizations think of Go Live and some of the activities within Go Live as sort of a one-time event, whether it's the data cleansing. I'm going to do a one-time event where
Mhm.
I cleanse the data and I migrate it over, or the business process mapping. I'm going to define it once, design the system, and then build the system on top of that. Same with inventory management. That seems to be the conventional thinking. But what are some of the flaws with that approach, or what are some of the nuances that you suggest is a better approach than that sort of one-time mentality?
Yeah, so I think, if you take, a good example is in the inventory space. You mentioned that one is, people do sort of understand you have to have good, clean inventory to operate successfully in an ERP system. And what you get is a lot of pressure from the system integrator to make sure your inventory is good. But you can kind of get talked into, I'm going to do a plant physical. I'm going to look at every inventory record. I'm going to make sure it's perfect. The truth is, even if you could wave a magic wand and make the inventory perfect when you first went live, if you don't have in place the right foundational pieces, the right, that you're doing cycle counting, and that when you do cycle counting, then you start to analyze and do root cause analysis for why inventory is getting out of whack, and then go after those things, and have those early detection processes in place to understand when you have a problem. If you don't have that, and you just do a plant physical and go live, okay, great. Day of go live, you're in good shape. The day later, you're not as good a shape. A week later, it gets worse. Here's the worst part about that too, though, is if you don't have those early detection things in place, you might go a month or two before you start to really see, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. Because when you first load that inventory and you're promising stuff to customer, largely a lot of times you're filling out of inventory. And if the first snapshot of inventory is good, you have that false sense of security that everything's okay. But as soon as you start to create new inventory and put it in place, and you don't have these foundational support processes in place, then you start to get a little bit out of whack, and then suddenly you start missing orders, and then you start looking in to find out what's happened, and things have been, you found some little thing that you should have detected day one or day two, has been going on for a month, and now you got a mess you're dealing with, and that's the big thing is if you don't have some of these things in place early, and if you treat it like a one-off event, you're just you're really gonna find that you got an unsustainable solution, and you don't want that. You want to be able to, you want to have, continuously monitor and stay on top of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of one of my early projects in my career. It was actually the first project that I was the lead consultant on back in the early 2000s. It was for a large utility company in the African region. And so I got to go out, fly to Africa and do this analysis of an SAP implementation. They had just finished implementing SAP, and then they had implemented a geospatial information system, is what they call it in the utilities industry. It's basically a technology that tracks all of your assets in the field and all the maintenance that needs to happen to go along with it, and it just shows you how it all ties together. So they implemented these two technologies, and they hired us because they said that the implementation was a disaster. Technology doesn't work. We've got all these data corruption issues, inventory issues, things like that. And, as we dug into the analysis, we found that actually the implementation itself wasn't the problem. The technology is working. The problem is all your processes and the people that are touching the system are breaking stuff. They're in there, they're not tracking updates to the assets the way they should. They weren't tracking maintenance the way they should. Even just inventory adjustments or inventory movements within the company, they weren't tracking that the way they should have. Technology would allow them to do it. It was set up right, but it just wasn't being used. So, to your point, it's almost like, it's almost like if you've got a big gash on your head and you just kind of slap a Band-Aid on it rather than trying to, rinse out the gash and, kind of get to the root cause of, how do I avoid gashing my head in the first place? Really getting back to that root cause, I think, is a really important point. And that's why so many companies go through these transformations, is to improve their operations, but yet they expect the technology to somehow just solve all their problems for them.
Yeah, and I actually like the example you used there, because a lot of what you just described there had nothing to do with the ERP system per se. It was all that kind of behavioral stuff that my philosophy is, if you're going to be in, so if you're going to go to ERP, you've got to be good in inventory. I got to be really good in my processes. Demonstrate that first. Figure that out. Figure that stuff out. I mean, if you got to, I've even seen where an organization says, well, I'm going to do cycle counting after I go live, because I know I have to. And then they find out that the layout of the warehouse really is not very conducive for that. So suddenly they're like, well, I can't really do what I thought I could do. You want to figure all that stuff out before you go live, not after you go live. And so I, some of these foundational things, get good at it first. I think that's the key thing. And then that tells you, you know what it takes to get there. Now it's a much smaller leap when you get to go live. If you're doing all of those changes to go live, the things that are absolutely required, system type stuff that has to be done, there's definitely change that happens at go live, no question. But it doesn't have to be all those things. All those half of that stuff you can do before you go live, and that way you kind of like I said, get good at it, and then all you have to do is figure out how do I get good at it in the new system, as opposed to how do I learn how to do it for the first time in the new system. It's a big difference.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're a CFO or any sort of C-level executive in a company, and your organization is about to go through that process that you're saying, or that you and I are both saying you shouldn't do, which is to force all those changes all at once at go live, even if you're doing a phased rollout where you're doing it by location or by department, that's just too much risk. You don't need to take that. There's no reason to take that level of risk. And if you're an executive, you should be terrified of that,
Yeah.
idea. And not enough executives recognize how big of a deal that is, or how big of a risk it is.
Right. Yeah. And even as you say, if it's a phase go live, for the people that are going live in phase one, it's new to them. And for the people going live in phase two, it's still new to them. So unless you do some of that stuff before, it's still, there's a lot of, you learn things go live one to go live two and whatnot, but still for the people on the floor that are going to actually experience it, they don't experience it until they experience it. And then, far better to experience as much of that as you can before go live than having to face it at go live all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If anything, just it helps morale, and at the very
Yeah.
least, it's going to help morale and reduce the chaos that goes along with it.
Right. And I actually talk about the kind of that go live leap, is that if you don't do any of that stuff beforehand, if you don't do that foundational stuff and you say, I'm going to do it all as part of my go live, then you really haven't demonstrated capability. And so there's sort of it's a big leap that takes place at go live. And if you can at least do some of those things and measure it, like inventory is a perfect example. If I'm monitoring my inventory accuracy and I can see I'm moving the needle, and I get the 98%, 99%, I got something measurable, tangible I can do. And master data stuff, if I want to look at my bills of material, what's my BOM accuracy? I want to work on that because I want my data to be as representative of the physical reality as it possibly can be. So I measure these things, and all that stuff are things you can work on before you go live, that's having something measurable like that is really good, because it'll help you feel like, all right, I know I'm ready. I've done the things. I knew I had a mess because I jumped into it and I figured out, and now I figured out how to get good at it. I'm finally now ready to implement. If you can do it that way, it makes the leap at go live to be much smaller, and you got a lot more. As you said, the morale is up because you sort of know I'm ready now. You know what you've worked on it. You know you can handle it now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, you hit on a couple of things here in the discussion that I want to come back to after a quick break. You mentioned user competency, and then we've been talking about system integrators and their role in a transformation. And so we come back from the break, I want to ask you a few questions around how to build more internal user competency to where you have that level of maturity that you should have by the time you go live, but most organizations don't have. And along those same lines, how you balance that with what the system integrator's role on the project is. And I think that's where a lot of companies struggle. So I want to ask you some more questions around that right when we come back from our break here. I'm here with Dave Beldyk from Third Stage Consulting. We're talking about transformation, benefits optimization, and we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more from Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Kimberling. I'm here at Dave Beldyk. You can find Transformation Ground Control every Wednesday live on YouTube, 10 a.m. Eastern Time in the United States, 3 p.m. London, or 11 p.m. Hong Kong. And you can also subscribe to us on audio-only podcast formats like Google, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, whatever the case may be. So, Dave, before the break, we were talking about, you mentioned this concept of user maturity. I'm going to come back to that, or user competency, I should say. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But before I ask that, maybe as a preface to that question, what are your thoughts around when to bring in a systems integrator? And I know that's a bit of a loaded question, but what's the right timing? What should we be thinking about in terms of how we engage with and partner with the system integrator? Tell me your high level thoughts around that.
Yeah, so I think, as you kind of look through getting ready for an ERP implementation, and you start thinking about the kind of things that you have to do to excel in there. I always I like to look at it as, if when the system is a good representation of the physical world, life is good in an ERP system. And so now you've got to figure out how do I achieve that? And it's not just about inventory. That's the obvious example where I can measure my inventory record accuracy, but we talked a little bit about how do I some of the master data stuff. How do I make sure that my bombs are representative of what we actually do, that my routes are representative of the actual rates we perform, things like that. If you're going to do any kind of supply chain streamlining, I think you want to do that. You want to do that before you get into an ERP project. You can be a mess trying to unravel that stuff. I've been through implementations where the organization took a look at their materials and they said, well, we don't really have time to figure out where what materials are going to go to what plants. So let's go ahead, extend all materials to all plants. That'll give us the most flexibility. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, because what you just did to the project team is you took what should have been this much work, made it this much work. And when you think about what happens when you do something like that, and I know I've gone I've gone a little bit down a tangent, but let me finish the thought and then I'll come back and answer your question. But when you think about what happens, it's fine. When you do something like that, let's say your project was going to dedicate 10,000 man hours or whatever, just pick a number, 10,000 man hours to your data cleansing activities. When you got a data cleansing activity this big and you're putting 10,000 hours on versus a data cleansing activity that's this big and you're putting 10,000 hours on it. Just think about that. I mean, in the big, when you extend all those materials everywhere, and I'm going to put so much effort, I'm going to get mediocre at best data. It's going to be sloppy. It just is. Whereas if I can really take the time to figure out where do I really want to run my supply chain, where do I really want my materials to be, I can hone in and make that footprint as small as possible. Then that same hours that go into that just makes the quality of that go up, up, up. So I'm always a big proponent of figure these things out first. When you're in the middle of a project, you don't have time to figure all that stuff out. Figure that stuff out first. Do your mapping of your supply chains. Understand what materials should exist where. There's 100 examples but it's stuff like that. Just figure out all the things that you can do that only you can do. And you don't need a system integrator to tell you how to run your supply chain, right? You've got to figure that out. And I always say, make that data footprint as small as you can make it. And if you do that, then the level of effort you put into it will make the quality of that go up, up, up. So, but it takes time and effort. So you say when do I bring the system integrator in? It's after I've done those things, after I've done all of the things that I can do to get ready for them. So I know when I bring the system integrator in, now I'm going to make the most efficient use of their time. I'm not going to be spinning my wheels. Like we said, the taxi driver, I'm not going to be cooking the kids breakfast while the taxi driver is sitting in the driveway. I've done that stuff. I figured it out and now I'm ready to go. And so to me, that's the key, is figure out those things that you can and should do before you bring them in, and then you'll be way ahead of the game. And that's something Third Stage can help with for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And You know, it reminds me a little bit of the analogy of, a marathon runner who, and by the way, I'm not a marathon runner, so I'm one of the least credible people to be talking about this. But to go with that analogy, if you, start a marathon just in a full on sprint, and then
Mm,
you've got 26 miles to go, but you haven't paced yourself, you're actually, expending too much energy too early in the race that, you risk not finishing the race, or at the very least you're dying by the time you finish. And it's a lot like that. I think a lot of people have the mentality of, okay, we picked our technology, we picked our system integrator, and we know we want to get this done in a reasonable amount of time. So we better start tomorrow. We better sign the contract, get the system integrator here right away. And of course, the system integrator, to your point, is all over that. They love that idea because they can start
yeah.
billing right away. They make money faster, and
Hmm.
they're winning. But I think you have to start slow and pace yourself. And we'll get in a second to your concept of user competency. You want to make sure you have that user competency built up before you bring in the system integrator. But I think that mentality, people feel like they're going faster because they're starting fast, and they think that's going to lead to a faster outcome. But in reality, I think what you're saying, and what I agree with, is that you're actually creating more difficulty. You're more likely to experience delays, and you're more likely to have problems with the implementation if you take that approach.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's back to that what I said. I'd like to change the dialogue about is I wish people would think more about how long it takes me to get the world class ERP operation as opposed to how long to get to go live. Because as long as you're just looking at how fast I go to go live, like I said, I can make a train wreck happen fast. But
Right.
that's not that's not good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like, you want to get ready and spend some time doing the things you need to do to get that foundation in place before you bring in the system integrator, or certainly at the very least, certainly before you bring in the whole army of consultants, because
Right.
the system integrators are notorious for bringing in the big army of people that are on site, or in today's day and age, maybe remotely. And certainly, you've got offshore consultants. A lot of times they're getting brought in, and it's real easy to lose control of that, lose control of that meter running if you don't have a handle on that.
Right.
Um, but when you look at what the system integrator does versus what you would do as an implementing organization, how do you differentiate between the project focus of the system integrator and the operational focus that's required to make a project successful? And you've talked about this in some of your thought leadership, the difference between project focus, which is what an SI does, and then there's the operational focus, which is what actually uh, is what leads to success.
Yeah. Let's see. A good example there might be in the data space. I like when I look at data, for example, that I'm going to categorize it as like two giant buckets. One is the set it and forget it bucket, and the other one is the monitor and adjust bucket. And by set it and forget it, so if you're talking about plant names, material names, and descriptions and stuff, things that you set them up once and they're not going to change them. But then you look at things like like my bills of material, and the ratios of ingredients in there. They as my yields improve, they might need adjusting a little bit. As my rates improve, I need to change my routes a little bit. As I get better and better at supply chain execution, I might have to change my lead time a little bit. So operationally, you've got to have things in place to be able to monitor those kind of things, and to be able to actually update them continuously. In a project, what the system integrator, they treat everything like the set it and forget it code, because all they're worried about is what values do I need to have in place to go live. And you're left holding the bag after go live. It's like, what are you going to do a year from now? If you haven't, first of all, if you haven't done that kind of analysis to begin with, you don't know how to do it. Two, you don't have necessarily the proper values in there to begin with. And then three, when it comes time to make a change, you're scrambling trying to figure out, well, how do I even figure out what my bomb accuracy is, or how, what adjustments I need to make to my rates. How do I even do that? If you haven't gone through that process. So it's again, it's that kind of thing where you got to think about, some of these ongoing things that you're going to have to do at when you're living in a system that you don't, go live is like, for the system integrator, it's like, tell me the value you want to go live, and that's all I need to know. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, there's a big difference between building a system, which there's very well defined inputs you need to be able to build a system, versus building an operational model and an organizational model that supports whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Those are two very different things.
Yeah.
What about this whole concept of user competency and decision making? Now, that's another thing you've pointed out in some of your thought leadership around the importance of both of those things, user competencies and decision making. What is it, and how does it apply to this sort of transformation and how you approach your transformation strategy?
Yeah, I think it's like some of the stuff we talked about before about that early engagement, getting folks started early, trying to, if I've got to put in place, many things, many processes, many support processes to be able to support my ERP system. If I can do as many of those in advance as I can, now my users have less to worry about at go live. So they have a better sense of what's coming. They have a better sense of how easy it is to do certain things and or not, and because of that, they can make better decisions. And I think that's the key thing is the earlier you have folks involved in the project, uh, just say the smarter they get, the more competent they get, the more clearer they understand, and the more they realize what it's going to take to be successful. And then you start to think about things like, when I'm getting ready to do my testing now I'm going to do some very detailed testing. I'm going to do my day in the life. I understand. I'm starting to envision how I'm going to do this in real life. And I know it well enough now to see that I'm going to have a problem on third shift because they do something goofy that, if we don't, they got some weird scenario that at plant so and so that if we don't, check that out, I can smell trouble. So you start to get people thinking about what it's going to take to be successful, and suddenly they start to gain in their confidence, um, and basically, I mean, it's the earlier you get started, the smarter you get faster, and the better decisions you make, and the less you have to worry about at go live if you take some of these other things and kind of get good at it before go live. So all of
Yeah.
that thing, that's the big thing is start early, because then like you said, nobody has ever complained about starting too early, right?
Yeah, and it's also what you're describing is a way to mitigate that dynamic where you lose control of the project. So many organizations that call us to come help remediate a failed project found that they just sort of lost control somewhere along the way. They brought in the system integrator, they outsourced everything to them. System integrator isn't as transparent as they could be with why we have 10 or 50 or 100 people on this project. What are those people doing? Do we really need them now? And you have to keep in mind there's an economic incentive there that's not aligned with yours. Your incentive is to build that competency in-house, or should be to build that competency in-house to optimize the spend on the implementation and to optimize the way the business runs in the future. And those two things are in conflict oftentimes. So it's everything you're saying is it's a way to reduce cost. It's a way to reduce risk. It's a way to increase benefits, especially long-term. And it's also a way to increase ownership of the project so that you can get rid of the consultants faster. And one of our goals at third stage is to work ourselves out of a job as fast as we can, because the faster we do that, the better job we've done, and the more happy, the happier the client's going to be.
Yeah, no, and you make a good point too. The if you get the more the higher competency you have with the folks that are actually in the middle of the implementing organization, then when you get toward the end of that engagement, you kind of pick the brains of the system integrators in a little better place. You're not scrambling with the kindergarten stuff. You've moved on to calculus now. Now you're really going after some of the stuff, because they're I mean, I'll be honest, I work with a lot of system integrators, and there's a lot of bright folks out there for sure.
Oh yeah.
And if you can make the most of that, that knowledge transfer at the end there is really important. And if you're scrambling trying to figure out how to do the basics of just pushing the buttons, and that's where your level of thought is at the end of your go live period, you're going to have to do a lot of learning on your own. But if you get pretty good and competent now, and you start thinking about in a year from now I might want to do this, I might want to do that, what do you think? If you can start having those kind of conversations before the system integrator even leaves, now suddenly it's a whole different ballgame. You're really the level of thought and the level of how quickly you get to world class. It's a game changer. So get started early, and make the most of the system integrator while you got them there.
Yeah, absolutely. And focus less on just trying not to screw things up too badly, and focus
Right.
more on how do we get real value out of this. You're spending a ton of money and time and resources on this project. You might as well get the value out of it. Which,
Exactly.
speaking of that, you talk about in some of your other thought leadership that we've reviewed with you. You talk about the dynamic of spending so much time stabilizing go live that you never really finish the go live the way you envisioned it. What do you mean by that, or maybe explain that phenomena to us a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think everybody who goes into an ERP system, they do have some lofty expectations of what life is going to be like on the other end of that. And if you have, if you've done a lot of laid the foundation right to begin with, and taking good advantage of the brain power that exists within your system integrator, and you kind of get to that the other side in a pretty good place, and you start going toward that world class thing. That's one thing. That's one end of the spectrum. But if you find that you didn't put the foundational pieces in, and you're struggling after go live, and all you want to do is I just want things to be, I just want to get through the day, with, I've lost sight of that end goal. I'm no longer thinking about world class. I just want to not go home with a headache every day. And when you get to that, it's almost a defeatist type attitude. It's not what you would call a failure, but it's certainly not what you would call a success. It's one of those. All I did was I migrated to a new system, and I stubbed my toe along the way, and I survived, but I can't say much more than that. And people get disheartened when you get something like that. When you go through a rough go live, it's hard to keep the momentum up, hard to keep that vision out there, trying to climb the world class. If you don't have those foundational pieces in place, it's pay me now, pay me later kind of thing. You're going to have to go do some of that stuff and clean it up. But
Yeah.
until you do, you're gonna be struggling, and you won't be able to really. I mean, world class is kind of out of the picture for you at that point until you do some of those things.
So a lot of what you're talking about here is focused on how to not only optimize post implementation results, but also how to make your implementation itself more successful, and doing it with less risk and less time, less resources, and higher success rates. But what about an organization or a project team that's already gone through the process, or they're in the middle of their transformation? They've already made a lot of the mistakes that you just advised not to make. If I'm halfway through, or I'm about to go live, or I've partially gone live, and I'm trying to right size things or optimize my implementation, what are some of the things you'd recommend to get started to sort of head the direction that you've suggested so far?
Yeah. So if you've already gone live, and you're struggling a little bit, then it's not too late. We can still take a look at some of these foundational pieces, and kind of see what is in place and what is not in place, and it's still it's still okay to work on those things. It's harder when you're in the middle of a project, and you've got the date of a go live hanging over your head. There it's and I've been through enough of those. I understand the pressure of hitting your timelines, and now you got this guy Eric coming in saying, well, wait a second, are you ready, and all that stuff. So it's a balancing act. You can't are you ready? Are you ready to go live? Well, you're never ready to have a failure. So you do want to make sure that you're not going to fail. And I think what I tell folks is, one of the things you can look at the most, that's the most telling indicator, is your inventory. If you have excellent inventory accuracy, it's not just about inventory per se. You have to do a lot of things right to have good inventory accuracy. And if you don't even know, that's very telling in and of itself. But if you go and do some quick cycle counts, and you find out, oh, I got trouble, that's kind of a red flag. So so if you just want to kind of get that one, I don't have time to take a 3-month break and all that stuff. I just want to get a sense of where I'm at. There's all that project stuff, but if you just want to look at operationally where I'm at, if you can prove to yourself that you have excellent inventory, you have to be doing some things pretty right.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at it from, if I got multiple rollouts or multiple sites, look at it at every site. And you might find out, if I got like 3 sites going live here, you might find that sites 1 and 2 are pretty darn good in inventory, but site 3, they got a problem. you might have to make the call to pull site 3 out of that go live. It's stuff like that you can do on the fly. But I admit it's a lot harder to do this kind of thing in the middle of a project. It's far better to do it before. Number one, first prize would be do it before. Number two, do it after. And number three is if you're right in the middle and you're a little bit nervous about, you can do a little bit of that and kind of test the waters and see where you are. And you might have to cause a pause if you see a lot of things that really make you scared.
Yeah, it's good points. We find that with a lot of our clients that are midstream, and a lot of clients hire us at that suboptimal point, but you're still better off making an adjustment even if it's late. And you have to think about the cost and risk of potential disruption to the project itself right in the middle versus the potential cost and risk of disruption to your entire operations. And usually if you really think that through, you're going to find that it's a lot less risky and costly to fix something midstream, even if it means pushing out your go live or incrementally adding to the cost of the implementation. But I think, beyond that, or just taking that a step further, so many organizations need to think outside the box of, how do I take 2 steps forward? I might have to take a step back to get those 2 steps forward. So rather than continuing to spin my wheels or, taking a project down this path that's likely to lead to failure and operational disruption, how can I take a step back to be able to take 2 steps forwards? And usually there's pretty targeted, prescriptive ways that you can have some real high value impacts on your project without materially disrupting the flow of the project or the timeline or the budget or whatever the case may be. So I think it's just a sort of a mindset shift, as you've said as well. Yeah. So well, good. Well, thanks a lot for being on the show here today, Dave. This was a good conversation, and certainly, for those listening that would like to maybe just get a quick sanity check or gut check on their either planned transformation, if you're about to start one, or if you're in the middle of one and you're trying to figure out how do I get things back on track, certainly reach out. We've got our contact information below and at the end of the podcast for those of you that want to reach out, even if you just want to have an informal brainstorming session around what you're thinking or what your challenges are. We can certainly give you some even informal guidance on that and what we've seen with some of our clients. So feel free to reach out, and Dave and I and others on our team would be happy to chat with you about that. So thank you again for being on the show here today, Dave. Really, really good to have you again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.